August 19, 1985. The Maplewood Garden Apartments, Syracuse, New York. Inside apartment 4, the lights were completely off. The curtains were drawn tightly against the summer evening. When investigators finally unlocked the door and stepped into the bedroom, they were struck by how peaceful it felt. On the bed lay 30-year-old Dr. Nanette Gordon. She was lying flat on her back. A vintage, tulip-decorated quilt was pulled all the way up to her chin. The heavy fabric had been meticulously smoothed out. Its sides were neatly, tightly tucked into the edges of the mattress. It looked like an army bunk ready for inspection. She looked serene, as if she had simply closed her eyes and drifted off into a deep sleep. Except Nanette wasn't sleeping. She had been dead for 2.5 days, and the pristine bed she was resting in was a total lie. Nanette Gordon was brilliant, healthy, and full of life. She was a resident pathologist, just months away from pursuing cancer research in New York City. She ran, she played racquetball, she went to concerts. On the night of Friday, August 16, a friend dropped her off at her apartment around 11 p.m. But at 4 a.m. Saturday morning, a terrifying sound tore through the quiet complex. The neighbor living directly upstairs woke up to what she described as terrible screams. Screams cutting straight through the floorboards. By Monday, Nanette's newspapers were piling up outside her door. Her car hadn't moved all weekend. When the building managers finally opened her door at 5 p.m. that evening, they found the pristine, tucked-in bed. But as homicide detectives looked closer, the illusion of order began to shatter. The bed was perfect, but the rest of the apartment showed signs of a sudden, violent struggle. In the dining room, a large ceramic vase had been violently knocked over. Next to the bed, a houseplant lay shattered on the floor. And then came the detail that made the investigator's skin crawl. Someone had swept up the spilled potting soil, but instead of throwing it away, they had stuffed the dirt inside a closed nightstand drawer. The chief homicide prosecutor would later remark that it was one of the oddest, most unsettling death scenes he had ever witnessed. It wasn't just a crime scene. It was staged. The mystery only deepened when Nanette's body arrived at the morgue. By a grim twist of fate, Nanette had just finished a rotation in this exact office. The man performing the autopsy was her former colleague, Dr. Eric Mitchell. Mitchell found clear, undeniable physical anomalies. Small red hemorrhages on her eyeballs. Deep discoloration behind her windpipe and larynx. Her brain showed severe vascular congestion. These are the textbook signatures of asphyxiation. A body starved of oxygen. Yet, on the official death certificate, Dr. Mitchell typed a single word for the cause of death: pending. Later, he officially changed it to undetermined. Nanette's family was furious. They knew she had been murdered. They hired an independent pathologist, who concluded immediately that Nanette had been strangled, killed in another part of the apartment, and carefully carried to the bed. It would take a grueling 4-year legal battle and a special panel of independent experts to finally overrule the medical examiner. In 1989, the cause of death was officially changed to what it always should have been: homicide. But who had entry to her apartment? There was no forced entry. The locks were perfectly intact. But weeks before her death, Nanette had confided in a friend that she felt unsafe. On 2 separate occasions, money had vanished directly from her purse inside her locked home. Even more disturbing, she realized someone had been moving her underwear around inside her drawers. A predator had a key. The investigation quickly zeroed in on a middle-aged maintenance worker. He lived directly above Nanette with his elderly mother. And because of his job, he carried a master key to every single unit in the building. On the weekend Nanette died, a bizarre series of messages was left on her answering machine. The first message was from the maintenance worker. He stated he had heard screams coming from her apartment. A few minutes later, a second message beeped. It was the same man, but his voice was different now. He told the machine to disregard the first message, that it was all a mistake. When police questioned him about the screams, his alibi crumbled into glaring contradictions. He refused to take a polygraph test. He hired a criminal defense lawyer. He shut his mouth and never spoke to the police again. Shortly after, he packed his bags and fled the county. A criminal psychologist sat down to build a profile of the shadow man who stepped into apartment 4 that night. The killer, he concluded, was a lonely, socially isolated peeping Tom, a man obsessed with Nanette. He had likely used his master key to sneak into her bedroom multiple times before, standing over her in the pitch black, watching her sleep, rummaging through her things. But on the morning of August 17, something went wrong. Nanette woke up. She saw him, she recognized him, and she screamed. Panicking, the intruder threw his weight onto her, suffocating her to silence the noise. Then, looking down at her lifeless body, a bizarre psychological compulsion took over. His brain tried to undo the violence. He swept up the soil, he hid the evidence in a drawer. And then he tenderly, obsessively tucked her back into bed, pulling the quilt to her chin to make her look like she was simply resting. Five years after Nanette was silenced, a telephone rang at 911. A woman's voice whispered into the receiver, "You have the right suspect. Pursue it. The guy upstairs did it." Before the operator could trace the call, she hung up. In 1992, the same phantom caller dialed 911. Investigators begged her to come forward. She never did. In 2019, the district attorney announced that the primary suspect, the maintenance man, had died. The DA made one final plea to the anonymous 911 caller. He told her she no longer had to live in fear. The suspect was gone. There would be no trial, no retaliation. He just wanted the truth for Nanette's legacy. The phone never rang. Dr. Nanette Gordon dedicated her life to finding the hidden truths of disease, but her own end remains locked away in the past, hidden behind a meticulously cleaned room, an old answering machine tape, and a perfectly tucked-in quilt.